Gas prices are so high. Why is that? The answer is there are a lot of factors. So to talk about all those factors, I invited an energy policy expert, Mark Bernstein, to come in and lay it all out there for us. Hi, Mark.
Hi, how you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for agreeing to come in. So let's talk about, is it fair to say it's not one thing causing these gas prices?
Yes, in a multiple choice exam, you would check all of the above and more.
Got it. And tell me about what all of those things are. I mean, I can list a bunch, but what do you see are sort of the top things that are causing this?
So the top things are, we haven't really recovered from the downturn of the pandemic when oil demand was down. We have a refinery problem in the United States and the fact that we have lots of really old refineries, and we can explain more of that. We have the war in Ukraine. We have increasing demand and not enough supply. And all those things together, mixed and matched, creates a situation in where crude oil prices are high, and that drives everything else up.
Right. There's that weird dynamic with crude oil prices where oil prices, crude, the barrel is high, and then gas prices are high. But then when they come down, gas prices don't really always follow. Why is that?
Yeah, it takes a little bit of time, and prices are a little sticky, so it takes time to flow through the system. But one thing everybody needs to understand is when you have a barrel of oil and you don't use that oil directly, it goes through a refinery, and that barrel of oil gets separated into a bunch of things: gasoline, jet fuel, diesel fuel, and fuel that's used for other purposes. And those prices are then kind of separate from the crude oil price. And the other thing you need to understand is not every barrel of oil is the same. Barrel of oil coming from Saudi Arabia versus Canada versus Mexico are different qualities. And those different qualities have to go to a specific refinery so it can separate into specific types of products. And you can't switch those things overnight.
Right. And all of those things, just let's be very honest, all of those things cost money and then add to the cost of a gallon of gas. Is that fair to say?
Exactly.
Right.
So everything along this situation costs money. So if I've got a refinery and I'm using Russian crude oil, I can't just substitute it with another crude oil unless it looks and feels and tastes the same as the Russian barrel of oil.
Right.
That's part of the difference.
Now, speaking of Russia, let's talk about that for a second. Obviously, the United States, we have pretty much phased out all of our Russian oil imports as of the end of last year, but that is not the case with our European friends, right? And there's other places in the world that are still importing Russian oil. But soon, according to the European Union, they are going to be phasing out the majority of Russian oil. And my question is, since Russia is among the top 3 producers of oil in the world, what is going to happen to the crude oil supply when the Russian oil is completely removed from the market?
We'll have to ramp up production from other places, from the United States, from Middle Eastern countries, from other places. And there is capacity to ramp up. It just takes some time. You can't just turn a knob and all of a sudden you get production. So the amount of oil flowing to Europe can be replaced relatively simply, but it takes some time. Right. So it can't happen overnight.
Right. Okay. So you're talking about, so there is room to ramp up production. So, right, we know that, oil companies in the United States have been drilling, but then they sort of shut everything down during the pandemic. And we know that things take time to ramp up, but you're saying that there is room to increase production. Why aren't they doing it already?
Because the economics don't require them to yet. Right?
Explain that. That's fascinating.
It's all run by this sort of international marketplace that doesn't always work very efficiently, but oil is a very fungible thing. So in other words, I could put oil into a tanker and put it on the ocean, and that oil could change hands a dozen times before it reaches a port by different companies, and it could head to a different port. And so because of that, this market just messes things up totally, right? But it reflects the fact that there is more demand than there is oil going into the market. It reflects the fact that it is not all equally changeable. And so it drives prices up.
Right.
And it's not always driven by cost, as we know. It's
Right.
driven by the perception of traders. So what happens is oil traders go, I think I'm not going to get a barrel of oil tomorrow. I better bid higher up for this barrel of oil. And it can kind of feed on itself too.
Sure.
Just like the stock market going up and down can feed
Right.
on it.
Self-fulfilling prophecy almost, that and then this just starts to ramp up. So okay, so it's not always economically feasible for these oil companies. So then on the flip side of that, they're sort of raking in record profits, right? So we know that in the first quarter one of this year, all the big American oil companies made billions in profits, with a B, billions.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, they lost a ton during the pandemic. That is true. They really lost a bunch. So,
but not too badly compared to.
Okay. So is this a price gouging situation?
So not directly, because the price is set in these international markets and traders do their things, and oil prices will take whatever price they can, oil companies will take whatever price they can get. Now, could they take some of their profits and feed it back into reducing gasoline at the pump of their owned stations, like Shell or Exxon could go to their stations and say, okay, we're going to give you some profits back. We can reduce the price of gasoline. Yes, they could do that. Would they choose to do that? No, their shareholders wouldn't like it, right? And so there is no incentive for them to go through and try to put some of those profits back into people's pockets. Should companies do that? That's a political decision, right?
Right. But I'm wondering, another question about this huge windfall of profits that these companies are getting, why are they not then reinvesting that into more production or ramping up production?
They are a little bit, but it takes a long time anyway, right? And then they're looking at the future and saying, all right, what long-term benefit if I'm making this investment? And the problem again comes to the fact that you've got to take this barrel of oil and refine it into gasoline. And in the United States, the refineries average about 45 years old. They're old. Oh. And the last one we built of any size was back in like 1977. We haven't built a new refinery, and it's cheaper to buy gasoline off the international market from brand new refineries that have been built elsewhere than it is for us to build a new refinery and do the United States. That's why we're importing gasoline. Is that a terrible thing? No, it's the way the markets work, right? But we need to reflect that in the fact that even if they would take some of this money and invest it into a new refinery, that's 10 years from now before you see it. Could they fix up some of the older ones and get things going? Yeah, but that's still a couple of years. So there's nothing that's going to help the near-term situation except two things: getting more oil on the market overall from other places globally, because it sets the global price down,
right?
And use less.
Right. And use less, right? And so that's a policy. So now there's this this policy discussion over President Biden sort of ran on this agenda of trying to clean energy. Let's move into the future this way. Obviously, there has been a lot of pushback on that, because right now we're seeing what happens when we don't have clean energy and we don't have enough oil to, gasoline basically to do our lives. So what is the right medium to make that happen?
But nobody ever stopped putting out oil leases. I mean, even in Obama, they still didn't stop. And there are oil companies have a gazillion leases that they're not using. And so
why? Tell me why, Mark. Tell me why.
The economics of it didn't work out for them to drill a whole lot more. I mean, they did. We produced a lot more oil in the United States over the last decade, more under Obama than any previous president in a long time. But most of that went to export, right? And partially because the crude oil we have in the United States isn't necessarily best in some places, but also because it was cheaper, right? We got more money on the export market. It was cheaper for us to import final products than to build a new refinery. So it all comes back to that interplay. But the other option we had at the same time was to really ramp up fuel efficiency and electric vehicles.
Right.
And we didn't. We sort of tried to a little bit, but the fact is gasoline demand and diesel demand still kept going up.
Mhm.
If we had pushed in, a decade ago, electric vehicle technology, we really pushed it. If we had pushed fuel economy standards that Obama wanted to do higher, we would have more fuel efficient cars right now. We'd have more electric vehicles on the road. Demand would be down, and therefore prices would not likely be as high. They'd still have gone up.
Sure.
But the less demand you have, the less you are beholden to these swings in price.
What about all these? So we know that President Biden keeps saying over and over, I've got 9,000 land leases, federal land leases out there, and these oil companies just aren't drilling. So all these people keep asking me, my followers and the people who watch my reports always ask, why can't we just have we ever been energy independent? And why can't we just make our own oil here and keep it here?
We do produce enough oil. We have in the last number of years to meet all our demands. But again, it's not all the right type of oil to convert into products that we use.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we export oil.
Right.
And we don't have enough refining capacity because it just didn't make sense when you could actually there's a huge brand new refinery capacity elsewhere and you can import gasoline. So yeah, we were independent in the sense that, we were producing more oil than we actually consumed in the United States for a few years, but we export a lot of that. And that's okay, that's an international market. That's the way things work,
Mm-hmm.
right? If we want to be less dependent on volatile supplies of resources, you just got to use less.
Right.
Right? And that's the mindset we need to get into people, is that also using less of it is not a sacrifice. Energy efficiency is not a sacrifice. It's actually cheaper. It's actually better. It's actually more efficient. It's actually cooler.
Mm-hmm.
Electric cars are cool. Teslas are cool, right? They're cool. They can do things that a regular car can't.
Right.
And that's the mindset we need to change. Is if we're going to solve these long-term oil problems, let's change out how we use things.
Tell me about, because I hear this all the time as well. Well, Biden shut down the pipeline, the Keystone XL pipeline. Would that have helped anything?
Well, he didn't shut it down. He stopped it from being built, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even if they said, go ahead and build it, it's 10 years away. Mm-hmm. And what that pipeline was doing is pumping dirty, heavy crude oil, really heavy crude oil that doesn't really turn into nice things like gasoline and jet fuel, which is what we need. And it was going to basically ship it down to Texas and export. That was most of it. And so no, wouldn't have helped anything. Now, long run, it really wouldn't have helped anything. Because that oil, we wouldn't really be using much of it in the United States anyway. Some of it, but it wouldn't be really refined here anyway. But no, even if it was started to be built 5 years ago, which is when the country still wouldn't have been any difference.
Right. What is it going to take? I mean, aside from obviously going totally like clean energy, which, as you're saying, and we know is cheaper in the long run. In the short term, is there anything that can be done to get gas prices down other than what is being done right now?
I'd love to tell you, yeah, there's something that could really happen. And yeah, it's not much. I mean, you can windfall profits tax and put that money back into gasoline prices, maybe. But people driving less tomorrow. So what's happened also in the past, when oil prices went up, we saw people drive less.
Right.
We actually haven't seen that in the last couple of months, which I don't get. I think it's because people were stuck in the pandemic and now they're driving again and tough on it. And I'm actually, from the last giant oil price, everybody's car is more fuel efficient than it was last time we had this. So we are, it is better that way on a per mile basis. But the fact is, in the short term, there's not a whole lot we can do except drive less.
Right.
And move towards thinking about how we change, how we drive, what we drive, and how we use oil. And it's cool stuff. And if you go look at all the new electric cars come online, the EV Hummer does something called a crab walk. All the wheels turn the same way, it goes sideways. The Ford F-150 Lightning can power your house if the power goes out, and it can pop up. They can do such cool stuff. So all this stuff, we can get people excited about it. They move to that, change how they drive. And that could have a bigger effect in the next year or 2 years than almost anything else. Just by you change attitudes, it begins to change what people look at. It begins to change what oil companies look at. It begins to change what politicians look like. It's kind of we need that shifting perspective.
Right. And then is there anything, is it fair to say that even if oil companies in the United States today said, you know what, you're right, let's ramp up production, is it fair to say we wouldn't see any fruits of that for a year plus?
At least. It takes time. You can't just turn on a switch.
Yeah.
The refineries don't have the capability you have to do upgrades and things. It takes years to drill a new hole and find it and pump it. And no, there is space available on other, the countries to ramp up production, and hopefully they will start. But, the other thing, of course, during the pandemic, everybody cut production, right? Because demand went down a lot.
Sure.
But it was such short-term thinking, because did anybody really think the demand would stay down? I don't get, the other thing that oil companies should be held responsible for. It's the fact that, they didn't make profits for a year or so. It's not like they lost money either. Okay. They didn't make much profits. Got it. But nobody thought it was going to stay down. We didn't know how long the pandemic lasts. But we knew it wouldn't stay down forever. And the lack of preparation for that, I think they should be held responsible for.
Yeah.
Because
now they would push back and they would say, why would we invest more? And why would we do that when we have an administration who is saying, we want to push green? Why would we invest long term if we know this is where the country is going to go?
It wasn't necessarily investing more, but keeping at least what they had, right? They shut in capacity. They reduced refinery capacity. They shut off some. And it made economic sense then, without any, and because everything is driven on quarterly profits, right? Mm-hmm. They had to do that without any forethought to say, well, what happens when everything comes back a year from now? We knew things would come back. Granted, I didn't realize it would come back as fast, right? So,
right.
It seems to me there is the problem in the markets is the short-term mentality of everything, and we need to shift that thinking so that the markets and the private sector have as much incentive to think long-term as they do to think short-term. And that's a different issue, not just faced by oil. The supply shortage of chips, all these other things that we've seen is because we had this thing where you have just-in-time inventory and everything is super efficient, except if there's a disruption. We knew a disruption would come,
right?
But there was no incentive in the private sector to do anything. And so I think government has responsibility to create, which they shouldn't have to, but they have to create incentives for private sector to have a long-term mentality rather than just think to the next quarter.
And I would think too, built-in resiliency in the event of another incident, because there will always be another incident, right? All right.
It's going to be climate change,
Right.
it's going to be war, it's going to be drought, it's going to be, all these things. And, so prices are going to start coming down, right? And a hurricane's going to come through the Gulf of Mexico, boom, price is going to go right back up again, right?
Right.
We know that's going to happen. So let's prepare.
Think outside the box a little and prepare for the next thing to come down the road.
Right.
All right, Mark, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. This was lots of fun.
Good.
It's good to talk about this stuff.